Ada Day. I think it's super important to actually, celebrate the intersection of creativity and computation on this particular day. When Ada Lovelace, many years ago, 205 years, I believe, ago, that she was born, and in her life, she basically, an important thing is that she created this intersection, which is super valuable. And yeah, so thanks for putting that together. So today we're going to be talking about risks and how they relate to creative endeavors, right? Yeah, so shall we just actually jump, right into it? And yeah, take it away.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thank you, Ada Lovelace, for everything that you did. My most favorite thing is the whole poetical science part of it, and also, the Flyology, the book where she wrote this big steampunk uh, drawing of how to make a fictional animal, but created, with materials, and then apply steam to it to make it fly. She is the first programmer, so she took Charles Babbage's work and saw past what he did not, and realized that a machine was more than just numbers and could do basic calculations or math. She applied, or assigned meaning to the numbers. She gave a number an entity. It could represent an idea or a thought, or something along those lines. So uh, she's a programmer, but at the same time, pure creator, and that really comes from her father being Lord Byron, who was one of the better known poets of the time, and still to this day is um, studied, read about, papers are just flying off the shelves, about him and his work. So, that's where this is coming from.
Mhm. Right. So jumping right into the first point. So obviously, on screen are the 6 points which we're going to be touching on. The idea here is to um, have, give or take 5 minutes, where we'll just sort of have a conversation, about each of these points. So yeah, let's start off with the first one. So creative barrier.
Yeah, and the risk involved, and the what's the risk of the creative barrier? What barrier does creativity uh, create and or have to combat? Using Ada as an example, she created all these notes in Babbage's works, and it wasn't picked up until 30, 40 years later, maybe even longer, I think, by Turing. Maybe, I'm not quite sure about that, but silence is a barrier even when you create it. Uh, Having a voice is a barrier, and these are social barriers to a degree. If we look even closer, making it at a personal level, what is the risk of creation, of putting yourself out there? What's the risk of not doing it? What are you going to do? Are you able to drop uh, these chains, so to speak, of embarrassment or failure, um, and or success? That's a barrier as well. So, that's what I'm thinking about when the creativity blockades.
Mm. Okay, yeah. So I suppose to bring it back to a practical, because obviously that is an interesting perspective in terms of just the social element, stigma, and so on, which actually, with groupthink and so on, that actually creates this weird, almost like gravitational pull, that keeps people from actually taking risks and applying themselves creatively, right? Because to
Hmm.
some extent, I mean, creativity is quite an intimate thing, right? If you think about it, right? You're putting yourself, in quite a vulnerable state to express something that's quite, yeah, intimate to you. So I suppose, yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. Now, if we could sort of go from internally to externally, right? So,
Mhm.
are there any particular sort of examples in terms of creative barriers that you would say, in terms of like practical application, that we should sort of give some thought to, and how to mitigate those, and basically how crypto could sort of help with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe I can apply crypto as a full ecosystem, including blockchain and smart contracts. The ability to mitigate or transfer the risk of the inability to collaborate or have or assign and receive value for what you're doing. That's where this technology kind of comes into play. If you can enter into an agreement and if you trust the code, you don't have to worry about the deliverability of what you're creating or the compensation. So I kind of merged a few things there, but that's what I see a huge potential in, is ability to create, to monetize it, but to protect it and distribute it without the risk of um, infringement upon ideas.
Mm. Yeah. Well, so I suppose here, an interesting reference would be, say, something like, say, making a movie or something, right? A film.
Hmm.
There is such a thing as good risk when it comes to being creative, and there's a kind of risk which actually is more debilitating, right? um,
Hmm.
so in a way, the distinction between these two is what we're talking about. So that the good risk is sort of like time limits, or which sort of put a fire under you, and then the not so good ones, I suppose, is sort of the administerial type stuff, where going back to the example of a film, you've got all these liabilities, for example,
Hmm.
right? Whether it's location, or having something delivered, ultimately, to what you referenced with the the next point with the deliverables, right? You
Hmm.
don't know if you're making a short film, whether you're actually going to be compensated for it, say, because that short film might be like an ad for for a brand or something.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, you really have a whole spectrum from uh, I'm going to make a little metaphor here, from seed to
Mm-hmm.
sell. And,
Mm.
it's a cannabis reference. Try, how do you insure cannabis? Can you insure it from seed to, and not sell, but seed to smoke or seed to consumption? Same things with a story or a piece of art. The seed is the idea, and the deliverable is ultimately expressing it to the world.
Mm.
The risk in between that, if we stick with the movie set, what's the risk of starting writing and not completing it? And then also, the external risk, such as a car runs through the set, or there was a many many things that we learned during COVID that no one was prepared for. All of these movies, all of these the releases and everything, all of the events, all the the town halls or the locations, everything was uh, quite a uh, void of risk, and it just opened up this whole idea of, wow, how connected is everything? What are the true risks involved, and how far does it go? And more importantly, the unknown portions of risk. Nobody knew COVID was going to come. Nobody knew it was going to happen. So you've got that, but at the same time, I think that there's so much people do, all of us on a normal basis, regular everyday basis, that has risk that we just don't know. We're kind of um, not necessarily desensitized from it, but uh, we're just unaware. You don't think walking down the sidewalk you're going to get bit by a dog, or at least most people don't. depending on the location where you are and your experience. You know, I expect to get bit by a dog.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Okay, right. So, let's jump into the next point. Deliverability. Like, so how do yeah, so in a way, so we've got three different segments that we could sort of address here, I feel. You've got the creative element, and then you've got computation, and then you've got crypto, right? All
Hmm.
of them, sort of represent, if it was a sort of a Venn diagram, the middle bit there is what we want to sort of aim for optimizing, where, there's a presence or sort of, yeah, I suppose the optimal state of the creativity and the utilization of computation as a tool, and what crypto brings from a sort of making things unique, and as well as sort of protecting things, say a safe or secure channel for communication. So yeah, there's I suppose different aspects. So yeah, what did you have in mind in terms of deliverability?
Um, deliverability and sustainability of the value. Um, a lot of people create things, especially open word type stuff, comics and poetry slams, some of these things that aren't really able to be captured into, I mean, it can be captured into a file, but it's often not compensated back to the person unless you get HBO or somebody and you get to do a stand up like Jamie Foxx along those lines. Um, I don't know whether I'm actually answering your question though. Would you mind just repeating it a little bit or rephrasing it?
Yeah, no, I mean, there wasn't. I suppose what I started with was just sort of going back to the reference of the Venn diagram, and having the creative person, and then having the computation element, the computers as a tool, and then the what's it called, the crypto element.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously in the context of deliverability here, you've got different aspects which are affected with the deliverability, right? I mean, some points which we're going to be touching on, further down, like accreditation and collaboration, and so on. But I feel like in essence, or at least what comes to mind here, is being able to before a creative says, okay, I'm gonna sort of enter into sort of a commercial agreement to create something. What's the probability that I'm actually going to get paid, or get paid on time, kind of thing, that being one of the things that I suppose crypto enables for to basically to mitigate that risk.
Right, absolutely. It provides a space and an environment where you can ideally a lot more safely and more securely than you're doing now uh, to um, achieve the deliverables or the executable production with the guarantee of the code uh, where these things are benchmarked. You could put this into a smart contract and have it flow throughout the entire production sequence. Once X is achieved, everyone knows that you know the compensation is going to flow.
Hmm.
So it's also it's able to protect that, but it's also able to allow people to budget properly. And we are very aware of the things that will pop up during creativity and creations and productions. That's the one challenge that's interesting that crypto can look at and hopefully solve via the technology is the unexpected risk. The things that come in. What happens then? How do you safeguard or ensure or indemnify for that type of unexpected event?
Awesome. Right, so let's jump into the third point: royalties catalog.
Right. Um, this is really best um, explained using the spoken word is one of the things that I'm interested in, and how do you
Mm,
protect those I don't want to call them street performances necessarily, but it's a little bit like that.
mm,
And is it supposed to be replicated and duplicated and distributed like that? I mean, there's something that's special about that moment in time. However, if it is, then one of the biggest things is we do want to get paid for our productions, and our what we give back to society. If someone enjoys it, um, is it possible to have a catalog that's connected, where people can continually get residuals off stuff? I mean, we're looking at new business models, new forms of economic production, and
mm,
with the royalty catalog, I'm in the insurance business, and one of the greatest things about it is residuals and renewals, just
mm.
recurring revenue. um, I only get that as long as I keep clients. So a royalties catalog, to a degree, could be that residual stream, the stream of the stream.
Yeah, yeah, quite, yeah. And in a way, what's good or helpful about this is that it's sort of, you know, it it arbitrages time in a way, right? It leverages time in a way where, in the beginning, when say, the creative wouldn't have as much liquidity or
Mm-hmm.
capital, but what you do have is time and the ability to build up a body of work. um, and then, later on in life, when you've mastered your, I suppose, your skill set, and you're, in a better position to, I suppose, take more chances. You're able to then, fall back, on the catalog and the royalties, in a way that helping the catalog mitigating the risks, where, you're in a position not to, be worrying about your basic needs, right? Getting to a
Absolutely.
point. Yeah.
Yeah. And also the fear of um, someone else taking it and running with it. Intellectual property, is tremendous. I mean, there's so many estates that have these tremendous lawsuits against a whole bunch of people. One of my favorite is Vanilla Ice, and David Bowie. Ice Ice Baby.
Mm.
Was that intellectual? Was it copyright infringement? So not only is it IP, but also the copyright side. Um, uh, you know, it allows. I think the technology allows for some of that, to streamline, to mitigate, and remove the barriers of getting attorneys involved and all of that big expense associated with it.
Mm.
Yeah,
Interesting.
and that's
Yeah.
where that's what drains just funds and money from the creative process.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, I suppose, yeah, like part of, yeah, you make up a really good point, which is part of barriers to creativity is, the I suppose the sort of administration aspect of it, where, yeah, as you said, getting lawyers involved and all sorts. Like, if we could be able to eliminate that, I think, or sort of, limit the amount of resource allocation, in the creative process that goes towards that would be, I think, time well spent, and sort of energy, I suppose, energy well spent.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. One of the favorite things that my attorney said to me is everything's really a business decision, which is against everything I say, that I believe. But he's like, hey, as long as you make enough money to pay the lawsuit, then do what you want. Um, so it adds a little dynamic to it if you think about it that way.
Yeah.
Is art, is creative, is it a business? Or is that what we're making it? And I don't want to split hairs, but it is and it isn't.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Okay. Right. So moving on to the next point, accreditation.
Yeah.
what? Yeah. So again, in the intersection of the creative, computation, and crypto, like what is now possible from an accreditation standpoint that benefits the creative that wasn't possible before?
There's quite a lot, but I believe one of the most important things is the ability to see someone's past works. I'd like to push the conversation towards um, accreditation. Could it be put on an NFT? Could you buy? Could a person sell their accreditations, sell their qualities, their qualifications? Is that something that could be monetized? Does it help uh, the creator, the creative, properly find the production, computational side of it, the developers and coders, um, and I think it does.
Mm.
I think we could almost take the accreditation to a point where um, the right parties are matched. Not eHarmony, so to speak, but a little bit.
Or more Tinder like. I'm joking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is. The collaboration, the ability to take the creator and the computer. I mean, it's very much a sexual thing without it being sexual. It's a dance.
Mm.
It's in a relationship. So you're not too
Yeah.
far off there. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
intimate.
It is. I mean, going back to what we spoke about at the beginning, creativity is inherently um, intimate, and I suppose one could sort of divide it up to sort of art and design, right? You've got art, which is a lot more personal and subjective, and design, which is more utilitarian and sort of sort of civic duty type in approach. But both of them actually require a level of oh, here's how I creatively see this thing. And if if the person is doing that in an environment that is risky, that is what's the word I'm looking for, that would sort of attack or make the person feel unsafe from the perspective of being able to actually express how they see things, or how they're being able to actually propose an idea or solution, uh, that kills the sort of the problem solving, the design, the creativity kind of thing. And I feel like yeah, the point that you made with accreditation is that being able to have, because at the moment it exists, I suppose it maybe helps to point to how accreditation sort of exists at the moment. So you've got institutions like schools, right, which which people go through and say, and at the end of it, a potential employer would sort of look to that as as a signaling point to say that, okay, this person studied, I don't know, fine art and they passed, or this person studied literature and they are knowledgeable in XYZ. But that is still like, they have to trust the school, right? So in a way, what CryptoSoft introduces is a way to have a verifiable history, which actually isn't just one point in time, but all the sort of additional points in time when this skill set has been deployed, and that person has been compensated monetarily for the value that they created. So along such a chain.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what I mean? What is a diploma or a degree worth? Um, Especially if you're in a completely different field than what you're pursuing. Um, the student that gets that degree, spent maybe 15,000 to 250,000 on a piece of paper. You know that they did this, but what knowledge do they have? What experience do they have to the real world? That's where the journey post degree, post school, um, creating this portfolio or CV, um,
Mm.
of things that can be verified. You know, here's the something that someone said to me, and this is Chris from the Reach language. You know, everything's about verification, and that's the biggest expense and the biggest unknown. If we can solve the verification side, then we've eliminated a lot of time and energy and pain, because it's really hard to verify, um, you know, many things. But I think that's where crypto comes into play, is the verification.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I suppose sort of like what you said earlier points to this next point, which is collaboration, right? In terms of finding people. Yeah, so I suppose a nice sort of little segue here.
Yeah, you know, collaboration is, first of all, there's something that people say in my environment or ecosystem, which is, um, that's on my roadmap. You know, I'm in the insure tech space. You know, I work with a lot of businesses, and you know what? Everybody's got everything their roadmap. Um, guess what, guys? You don't have a roadmap in the a metaphorical sense. You may have it drawn out, but you know, life is funny. We could be sitting here working on something that's already been created. But more specifically to collaboration is uh, it kind of goes back to the barrier. You know,
Mm.
if we address the barrier of creativity, it leads us into the collaboration, and to collaborate safely, freely, openly, and that's what generates the most output, if you will. You've got to really make a place where people feel comfortable dancing, singing, saying stupid stuff, but at the same time realize the importance and the seriousness, the sincerity, and the passion that's there. But you know, that's a hard thing to do when you've got your individual interest and the social or the collaborative interest. You know, everybody's got to bring something to the table to get to where they want to go. Um, and you know, do you collaborate on one individual's product or production, or do you collaborate concurrently on things? Everything's up for exploration once you can create that safe environment to do so. And safe being, everyone feels cool, respected, and knows that they can not have to think about the attorneys or anything like that. You know, intellectual property, stealing ideas, all that kind of stuff. And ultimately, if you can't execute on any of it, then is it really worth going after?
Yeah, yeah. This is actually an interesting point because there's, you know, you and I have spoken about the inertia that happens between sort of centralized entities and decentralization, right? Like, you know, for instance, you know, to sort of to be more specific, you know, you were having a conversation about, say, branding, right? You know, branding is important because it has to do with communication, but in a decentralized project, as much as sort of democracy and, you know, all folks sort of coming to an agreement onto, you know, in terms of what should be done, say for example with branding, um, such a thing would be, the cost benefit wouldn't make sense because it would take so long, and at the end of the day, like, you know, the decision wouldn't be sort of arrived at from a perspective of someone, say, who has, you know, particularly a particular knowledge on you know, that on that particular domain, right? So it makes sense to actually, you know, opt for some sort of a hybrid between decentralized and centralized, right? In sort of in giving someone that particular responsibility to execute on something, and create sort of, you know, a way for mitigation to sort of happen if some, you know, if things go wrong, kind of thing. And
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, decentralized branding. You know, how do you create an image that represents decentralization, um, a static image? I think it almost has to be something if we're talking about a participatory endeavor, we're talking about an image that never changes, moving. It's just a complete creative, entropic, random thing that you know that would represent the mind, but also the social, global consciousness, subconsciousness, everything. It's you, decentralization is a really tricky word when it comes to um, all of the parts of productions,
Yeah.
branding from the beginning to the end. I personally just don't believe that we can achieve true decentralization because of the polarity, um, uh, magnetic forces is what I'm going
Mm.
to say.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everything's polarized to a degree, and that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah. I mean, it's in between. It's a hybrid. Where I feel like there's value, and I think the sooner we sort of communicate this to the community, and folks kind of disabuse themselves from this idea of decentralization maximalism. I think the better off we'll all be. But yeah, yeah. So actually, a good sort of link between collaboration and this next point here, deep exploration, is a point which you just made, which is what's beautiful about mitigating all the unhelpful risk is getting someone to be in an environment where all the stuff which would actually affect their possibility or their capabilities to be creative is put to rest, and they're able to actually then just be exposed to the positive risk, right? Things like time and problem solving challenges, and that kind of thing, without sort of, I suppose, the liability aspect of it, which then would just make people hesitant without it actually creating much value. I think so. So yeah, I think the point that you made there about collaboration, like creating an environment where collaboration can happen like with a lot less friction, I think is really quite interesting, and I think related to our prior conversations about what you're thinking about this particular next point, this final point here, deep exploration.
Yeah, um, it's deep exploration. When you're there, um, you have to a little bit isolate two different things. Going after the goal, or the distributable, the deliverable or the executed product, but at the same time realize that on this roadmap or this path, the cliche, it's not the destination, it's the journey. It's a great one. It really is. We're entering into the experience economy, with the sharing economy and all of this kind of things. But the true deep exploration happens live. It happens with people in the collaborative sense, but it also allows you to step away and take all of what you just consumed or heard, or just all of these jets of ideas that went by you, and then take them back and do your own personal exploration and go deeper internally and deeper um, uh, out externally to your friends, to your partners, to your collaborators, to whoever whoever will listen. I think sometimes all of us in this whole blockchain and crypto community are like, hey, we're talking, will anyone listen? you know
Mm.
um, and sure enough, after 3 or 4 years, somebody says, hey, I'm interested in that. Did you know blockchain could do XYZ? I'm like, yes. Yeah, but it is a cycle of creativity, and each idea, each thing, if you can keep it going, that inertia and that momentum, um, we can explore as deep as we'd like, um, as high as we'd like, as broad as.
Can you hear me?
Creatives and the coding and the computation. There's really nothing.
We appear to be having some issues, some connection issues. Let's just wait and see if we'll be able to recover. Yeah.
Am I here?
Yeah, now you are. Okay, go ahead.
Finding that intersectional space of the creator and the computing. I hate calling people computers, but the coder developer. But finding that where there's this, back and forth, this like, hey, here's what I'd like to do, and they're like, okay, well, Vue doesn't do that, or I can't do that in JavaScript, or you actually want a logo or an icon and not a brand. There's this mutual learning space that's created, and that's really what we want to explore. Let's explore the ways to get to that path and to maximize the output of that path, and that's a pulsating energy that, if it's done properly, it just keeps going forever. I don't want to say linear, because I'm exploring the idea of time or an event as a orbital thing, and not orbital as in circling, but this a spherical explosion, which goes past, present, back, future, up, down, left, right, and everything. That encompasses, takes everything into consideration, all the events of the past, present, and future, and what does that look like?
Yeah, dude. Yeah, I think that is such a good point to end it on. In a way, starting at the beginning, it's sort of like a Mobius strip, I suppose, right? Being in an environment where the human is able, I don't know, maybe sort of like this huge cybernetic brain, as of humanity as a whole, with all these sort of different nodes being able to interact with, as you said, like different specializations, and being able to exchange information and learn new stuff, and because that's where value is created, and sort of in the collision of ideas. Yeah. Anyway, dude, Quasar, thank you very much for coming on and having this conversation. Yeah, risks super important in the context of creativity. And now, so have you got any brief closing comments?
Yes, I do. I would like to end by reading a 45-page poem by yours truly. I'm kidding. The biggest risk that there is really here is not doing it, not being open to it, and communication requires a speaker and a listener. I dare everyone to learn more about listening, because that is collaborating. That's the biggest thing I think that we're missing. It's dangerous to listen to people.
Dude, thank you so much. Right, so now we're gonna transition over to our next bit. We're running a little bit over. But that's okay. We're sort of, this is jazz, right? We're gonna sort of keep it nice and fluid, and not be too overly concerned. We can always sort of compensate for stuff like time running over as we move forward. Okay, now I'm gonna bring on James to talk about learning. You are now live, James. Wait, yeah, I think you're muted. Yes.
Totally.
There we go. Okay, no worries. Dude, it is so awesome to have you on. Because of time, I feel like we're just gonna jump straight into it. if you do not mind. We don't have to do the whole 8 a day sort of thing, because we already sort of did that, at the beginning. So yeah, let's just jump right into it. So we're gonna be talking about learning as it pertains to the intersection between creativity and computation. Let's actually just jump straight into the first point, which is experience.
Man, hey, it's so good to be here and be taking this conversation live on Cast. Hey, so uh, before jumping into experiences, I just want to say that that conversation you had with Derek was so powerful, and this entire conversation about learning, it could all be a response to what you guys were just saying. So there were a few things that really resonated with me there, but at the end, while he was talking, I was thinking of this idea of flow state, right? And so anybody who's creative has heard of this idea, whether you call it focus or flow or losing track of time. And there's more formal literature about it, and I think like a lot of ideas, I think this one can be overused. But while I was listening to Derek talk, I was really making the connection between the individual finding that state of flow and all of us as a species finding, there already being this flow of growth and ideas, when he was saying the bit about things extending backwards and forwards and through time. So for me, when we think about learning, the idea of flow state is really important, because and it functions on both levels. How do we get somebody to the point where they can achieve that state on a regular basis in their personal life? And how can we get as many individuals as possible to kind of join in on some element of the story? And this is an urgent problem, I think. I at least speaking from here in the United States in the year 2020, a lot of people feel disconnected maybe from a broader flow, and I think we have a chance to counteract that. So all of that's connected to also what Quasar was saying. When he was describing this idea of a seed of an idea, or he was saying how everybody has a roadmap, but that's a long way from having deliverables, right? And because of the way the last few centuries have been structured, we didn't get to hear Ada Lovelace talking about that until decades later, mostly because of her gender. But of course, we've probably all heard Thomas Edison won the genetic lottery in the right way, right? So we all kind of have heard of him. And I don't even know if he actually said that thing about genius being 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. But I think that's directly what Derek was talking about when he was comparing, the seed of an idea to this idea of what you're going to deliver. So in order to get people there, right, this is why we're going to finish up with executive functioning, which is simply the ability to follow through, right, to see plans to completion, given everything that might happen in the real world. And in order to start talking about how people get to that point, we have to talk about experiences. So we can think about a young child. We can think about how to a 3 or a 4-year-old, drawing a picture is creativity, and it's sufficient. And the scope of that project is manageable for a small child, because they understand how to, where to get the paper and where to get some, markers or crayons or something to draw with, and they can create on the paper in a way where there's no fear of going wrong, because they just understand intrinsically that by drawing they get better at drawing. They've had that experience, right? And somewhere over the course of too many people's lives, we lose the understanding of what it takes, what it feels like to take the ideas in our head and mold them into something real, right? Mold them into a deliverable. And I think part of that has to do with there's cases where there's a lack of access to experience in a way that renders the ability to have ideas, you know, as you grow up and you confront the limitations of adulthood. But this even happens to kids too, right? This happens to teenagers. We run into limits to the types of experiences we're able to have, and that in turn can stifle creativity.
Yeah, dude. So many points. So many really awesome points.
Watching you guys for a half hour, you know, there's a lot of time to think.
True. Yeah. Okay, dude. Like everything from the importance of being in a state of flow, and the importance that has in relation to one's sense of purpose, how the pandemic has just like thrown everything into disarray, and in some way that is an opportunity to actually sort of linking to a conversation that you and I had yesterday, sort of relating to the potential in improving the conversations between the parent and the child and the teacher, creating an environment that has stability, that is that can actually withstand black swan events like this. And what's interesting about that is it's relevant not just now to the whole, basically the whole planet in the context of what's going on with the pandemic, but also in peacetime and in wartime, that varies from geography to geography. So stuff that will be developed in this time, like for example, in Kenya, there was some post-election violence, I think in 2007 or something, and there's an idea that came from that, an app, I think it was called Ushahidi, which translates into brotherhood, to try and help with the healing in that whole process. And later on, post that this application is actually being used across like different cultures. Like it came from this specific problem in this particular geography, but now it's being used worldwide. So yeah, I feel like all the stuff that crypto will sort of enable in a sort of in a classic timeless way in this particular instance will carry on being sort of pervasive, beyond, I suppose, beyond this particular hitch in time. So let's just quickly jump into the second point, which is literacy, right? Yeah, share your thoughts on this. Yeah, what are you thinking?
Yeah, man. Oh, this is so much fun, and this is so essential, right? These are the ideas that are going to drive us to do things, right? To have deliverables. Okay, but literacy. Anybody who's multilingual understands that they can have different thoughts depending on which language they're choosing to think in, right? This is not a
Yeah.
this is what's the word I'm looking for? Not a controversial point, right? And so literacy gives us all the ability to have more and more sophisticated thoughts and ideas, both because at a micro level, we can gain different words, right, that maybe we didn't know existed. Finding out that there's a word for the feeling you've been having is a really empowering experience for all people to have, right? And it's as I think that's why it's good for teenagers to read books, right? So they can find out that they're not alone. But then when you find out that there's words for feelings that you might be having, and that the subset of those words is different in one language and in one culture than another, it's breathtaking just to realize that depending on what language you grew up using, you might have an entirely different array. You might have a different palette to what you think is possible in your mind. And then, of course, as you move towards mastery of any language, even if you are monolingual, I am. I don't really speak any foreign languages fluently besides English. And sorry, I'm even just to use the term foreign language. That's evidence of my American centrism. I grew up in an education system that trained me well. But even once you're inside of one language, having more and more words to talk about things allows you obviously to go deeper and deeper. Now, the reason I'm saying all of this is that I think as a species, maybe we've overlooked the maybe non-direct utility elements of thinking about mathematics as a language, computer code as a language, and then different computer languages, right? Programmers will tell you how differently they think depending on which language they're using, in a way that's perfectly analogous to this idea of how we think different thoughts in different languages. And the argument at the secondary school level for having, arithmetic as and eventually algebra as part of the curriculum in our factory-based school system was to prepare people, right, to use math in jobs. And that's fine as far as it goes. And it's probably still true to whatever extent that, right, in order to train the workforce, we need people to know enough math to participate. But I think what's overlooked is the idea that once we know quantitative ideas, once we know ideas that have to do with computer code and what we can write, just like adding additional languages to that we can speak, once you add these computational languages and you can become fluent and literate in those languages, you're going to have different sorts of ideas. And we're watching this right now with the blockchain, right? There's now that we're going to be able to do things, microtransactions, contracts that people can agree to with minimal friction. There's so many new ideas rolling out. NFTs. Anytime you tell an artist about NFTs, just the fact of having that idea in their brain brings them to brand new places.
Yeah. Just to quickly pick on that last point, an NFT, just for those who possibly be watching who don't understand, could you repeat? Could you possibly just break it down? Because in a way, it's sort of like, the weird thing about, in the digital realm, we've had things which are, infinitely duplicate. Like you're able to sort of duplicate them infinitely, or sort of replicate them infinitely, and what this particular thing is something which basically sort of you're able to create unique things which can't be duplicated in a digital realm. Would you sort of describe or define it in a slightly better version than that?
I think that's exactly right. And without getting into...
Well, I think you're muted.
Oh. No.
Yeah.
Hey, can you hear me? Hello?
Wait, yeah, yeah.
You got me?
Yeah, you appear to still be muted. Yeah,
Hey,
try
hey,
and
can
try
you
to speak.
speaking? Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah. Sorry, no, carry on.
Hey, no worries. So right, let's go really deep into NFTs when we follow up with a music conversation. But the idea is, right, it stands for non-fungible token. Fungibility is what you were just talking about, right, in terms of being able to produce equivalent copies, equivalent indistinguishable copies of things, is what we mean by when we say fungible. If something is not fungible, it means it's one of a kind, right? You can only have this one. There are technical challenges to tying non-fungibility on the blockchain to an actual object or an actual digital artifact, right? That might already exist. But that's something that people are working on. And so just this idea that soon you're going to be able to represent ownership of creative property might change the rules of what sorts of creative property or what sorts of creative opportunities exist for people. And so that's, I think, what I'm trying to do is kind of provide the prompt for the drunken conversation that I do recommend people have about NFTs, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a programming tool, isn't it? Right? Your culture can program you to be able to have certain ideas. And you just watched me in real time continue to try to break my code to try to counteract it, right? Because that's the phrase I grew up with. Was there was English class and there was foreign language class. Those were right, and those are formal terms that go on your transcript, and you're taught to refer to things in those ways, right? And when you're 14, you don't think twice about that, right? But and then so now I'm programmed, and I just embarrassed myself by using that term, right? But this is the journey to be on, right? So actually, we could talk about undoing your literacy. That could be a topic for another time too. I love it. No, this is fun. I think it's important to show up as we are, you know. Yeah, let's put projects and problems together, because I know that this is free jazz, but I know I'm probably playing for too long. So beautiful. Yeah, perfect, perfect. Um, well, if we take this part about experiences as having value, right? We can agree that when people have experiences, they build the ability to accomplish things. Rich and varied literacy matters towards that end, but literacy alone is not enough, right? You can have an experience reading a book, but reading a book is not the only kind of experience. Projects give us the chance to have experiences, right? So then we know what exploration feels like, and we know we're able to develop this feel for what it is to do something, right? To finish something. And going back to, I guess, the school version of this, right? There's a bunch of different ways to teach somebody to add or to use the tools of algebra. But there's a very different, it's a very different thing, not just to convey the facts, but to give somebody a real feel for the context in which that tool is useful. And that's why I, as a classroom teacher, I really came to understand that projects are so essential, because if all I do is try to convey isolated knowledge, then there's nowhere to port that, right? So if we want to compare this to the blockchain, you have to tell your Cardano node that's running what port it can talk in and out with. And I don't think we do a very, very good job porting school knowledge to real world knowledge. Those two things just misalign, and a lot of people just end up pissed off that they ever had to take math as a teenager. Projects give us a way to port knowledge by saying, look, hey, here's where this goes. Here's this thing called algebra. But actually, and skipping ahead, I guess, to tools for a moment, there's this tool that grown-ups use in the real world. It's called a spreadsheet. And if you know how to use Excel, that might come in handy at one time or another. And as it turns out, you can model any algebraic function in the columns of a spreadsheet. Now, what's happening if you choose to do that is, sure, it's a connection to the real world, but there's also this piece around you're actually just learning practical skills, how to navigate in Excel, right? How to make a plan. And any project exists in time and exists as a series of steps where one goes to the next. Learning how to keep track of those steps and understanding which step you're on, like that's at the core of executive functioning. So when we talk about using projects, it's both as providing context, that's the port I was talking about, and also just more exposure to the practical skills that are going to make knowledge useful. And actually, I guess I can pause there before moving on to problems.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so this is quite a key issue, and you've referenced the sort of the factory model of schools, and I feel like in the spirit of Sir Ken Robinson, who sadly passed away not that long ago, his whole thing was, we need to address exactly what you just said there, which is the disconnect between what is being learned and the real world, right? Essentially, and you brought up a really good point, which was it's one thing to intellectualize, right? To read theory. It's a complete other thing to practice, to the point, not to the point, just the mere what's the word, attempt or effort to practice something translates into muscle memory, and sort of, as opposed to reference a film here, you've got the Total Recall thing right at the end, when the character doesn't, he's sort of switched into different minds or bodies so many times that he doesn't remember who he is, but ultimately what saves him is that a reference to this like muscle memory, which is sort of like inherent and innate, in terms of his recollection and connection to his real self. Yeah, so I feel like that's really quite rich.
Oh,
So
dude, there's all right. So two things there. So
okay.
one, so this idea that the emotional experience of being wrong on, say, a high stakes exam, right? This is my favorite argument for giving kids tests that they care about in school. If you get a question wrong that you wanted to get wrong, that actually that the physiological response to that is enough of an experience that it does exactly what you were just talking about with the robot from Total Recall, right? That it gives us a hook. And all the questions, if again, you have to care about the results of the test in the first place, but
Mm.
so many of the facts that I actually remember learning in high school were in response to that, right? Oh, I got that one wrong. Well, I'm never gonna. I remember not knowing where the state of Nebraska was on a map when I was a teenager, and I was like, I don't. But then once I got that question wrong once, I knew it later on. So there is this experiential piece, but even more important, I think the word practice should have gone on this list of ideas that I wrote here. And it's always interesting to me the way that when we talk about kids practicing something, it's super repetitive. It's rinsing and repeating, right? Doing the same thing over and over again. And this goes for spelling and grammar and arithmetic, algebra, right? This idea of repetitive practice always plays a role. In the real world, the word practice means something completely different. When you talk about practicing law or practicing medicine, those are not repetitive, right? Practice is applying everything you know to novel problems day after day. And by doing so, having the privilege of finding out what works. So I guess this gets us over to problems, right? If when I am solving problems, I have a chance to put into practice what I learned through experiences, through my reading, through maybe guided projects that I did to get to the point of solving my own problems. So I love that you brought up that word, but I think you had more to say.
Yeah, well, not really. I'm just sort of trying to do the careful dance, sort of between now and 5:30 UTC. But yeah, just to quickly, I mean, yeah, this point which you bring up is a good one, which has to do in a way with how the human brain works, right? If you think of the pathways between neurons, they are the more often that happens, and the sort of new connections that are made, that's where the value is, right? And as you said, like whenever someone's burned, or they can't remember where a specific state was on the map, it's these things which create these connections in the brain, right? And so yeah, I feel like okay, just to sort of to throw a curveball in there, how does crypto solve for this?
So one, I think it's, and I do want to get to that question, but I'm gonna come at it from the outside. So
Okay.
So there's this energy, maybe broadly in the crypto or blockchain space, and it's not among everybody, but it's this idea that blockchain or crypto is some kind of magic bullet, right? If we slap this salve on everything, it's going to solve a whole bunch of problems. And that's not true. And a critical mass of people do realize that. But what replaces that idea? And what replaces that idea is really understanding what blockchain and what crypto is and isn't good for. And once you understand that, then applying the strengths, the actual strengths of it to real problem solving. And so if that part's okay, then clearly we don't want to go too far in the direction of I don't want people to be uncertain that this isn't a broad and wide-ranging solution. It's just helpful to limit ourselves. Once we do limit ourselves, then we see that it's still pretty far and far-reaching. And what we need to do is look closely at what problems crypto actually solves so we can see it in action. And as a shorthand for that, I think just anywhere that you can walk into a situation and say, hey, if I trusted this person, or if I trusted this process, or if I trusted this institution more, my behavior would change, the way I interact with it would change. If there's anything that maps to that basic argument, now we have fertile ground to try some new project. But people have to understand what those possibilities are, right? And so where I think experience-based learning, project-based learning, problem-based learning comes in is anybody who does understand the problem-solving capability of a blockchain has a responsibility to expose other people to it, so that they, going back to this idea of literacy, can go off and have their own ideas for what they're going to do with that tool. Because we use the word ecosystem to talk about everybody who's kind of pitching in and working together on this massive task of adoption. The way we get to adoption is by having more people arriving who have more ideas, and those ideas that anybody who got here earlier just weren't capable of having, right? Everybody who came to crypto already, their brains must be wired in some way similarly, right? Whatever tiny fraction of the population who already thinks that crypto is a good idea, right? We're wired in some way that got us here. I don't know what the common thread is, but we can assume that people who haven't yet embraced these solutions might think differently. and therefore, if we just keep hammering on the same messages that got us here, we're not going to get everybody else. So we have to go out and expose people to what the tools are, so that they can go off and have ideas that I would have been, incapable of having, for example.
Yeah, I mean, this brings me right to the conversation which you and I were having moments earlier, when we're sort of collaborating within Figma. But that's a conversation for another day, right? So now we've got
interfaces, my friend. I know it's time to launch into interfaces.
Yeah, well, we've got 2 minutes before Charles's conversation with Greg begins. So, but we still have tools and executive function to cover. Do you want to talk about them briefly separately, or do you want to sort of amalgamate both of them?
Yeah, and I think I've been kind of jazzily hinting on both of these, right? I mean, tools, there's plenty more to say, and I think it would be interesting to go deep sometime, charting both the tools that we use throughout a human lifetime, and in parallel charting the tools that humanity, the human race, has used over millennia, and trying to gain some insight around what the new tools are that are coming online, and what we're going to be able to do with them. And that brings us back to executive functioning, right? If we're actually going to be able to, I love what Derek was saying about the roadmaps earlier, right? If we're actually going to be able to accomplish our visions, watch our seeds grow, collaborate on moving through roadmaps, we need to incorporate these new tools into our understanding of how things get done, right? Because the days of speculation about what the blockchain can do are rapidly coming to an end, and it's time to we're going to be building stuff faster than we can understand. So I'm grateful for the time to reflect on this here.
Dude, so many good points. Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's always good when a conversation is sort of quite dense in terms of ideas as opposed to, you know, being anemic. And I feel like this has been the case here. Like, there's so much more to talk about, and I really look forward to, again, just continue having these conversations and iterating, you know, the nature of cast, the nature of community collaboration, and so on. Cool. So yeah, I think it makes sense. Do you want to sort of say anything in closing, and then like I'll basically just end it on the last thing that you say? Let's do that.
I'm right there. No, that was a perfect closing. Hey, here's to the conversations to come.
Okay, awesome, brilliant. Cheers.
Cheers.